Thank you for participating in our Museum Month activities. So to begin, do you think you could give us a brief introduction about your museum and what you personally do there?
Of course. So thank you so much for having me. I'm Lisa Terech. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Oshawa Museum. And as our name sort of implies, for the Museum for the City of Oshawa, we tell the history of our community from the earliest Indigenous inhabitants all the way to present day. And we do so with three historic houses, all three of which are still standing on their original foundations. So we use these houses. One of them is set up like a traditional Victorian home. One of them is our administrative building. And then the third we use for rotating exhibit space so that we can tell as much about our community's history as we can. And in my role of community engagement, I wear many hats, which is common for a lot of small museums, which is great as well, because you do get to have your hands in lots of different pots and lots of different experience. So I coordinate the membership for the Oshawa Historical Society. One of my big roles is partnerships and outreach programs. So trying to spread the good word about the museum and who we are and what we do. And social media. A very large part of my job is becoming digital engagement, what we do on social media, videos, our blog, different things like that.
What is your favorite artifact at your museum?
My favorite artifact, that is a really tricky one. It's almost like picking like your favorite kid or something like that. like so I don't know the collection as well as our curator, but I have been at the museum for about 10 years and I've gotten familiar with a few objects. One thing that does come to mind is a set of barber tools, which were used in the community by a man named George Trainer. And he worked in and around South Oshawa, in and around Simcoe and Bloor-ish, that area. And yeah, he was active for quite a few years. And I think that sticks out because it was actually donated by my family.
Oh,
My
wow.
dad's, he was my step great grandfather. So my grandma, she was the woman she was my grandma. And it was her dad who was this barber. So our family was looking for, what do they do with an old razor and an old electric razor? And I'm glad that we thought of donating it to the museum. And so that has got that personal touch for me. But we've also got two artifacts which are quite unique in telling a very interesting chapter in Canada's history. So there was the 1837 rebellion of Upper Canada, where essentially there was a group of people who were displeased with the current form of government, and they tried to overthrow it. They were unsuccessful, but a number of men ended up jailed in the Toronto jail. And when they were there, they created these boxes, which today are known as rebellion boxes or prisoner boxes. There's maybe 200 of them in existence. Quite a few are still in private collections, but quite a few have been donated to museums. And we have two in ours. Both of them are related to a man named John Dickey. What's also interesting is his name does not appear on prisoner records. We were able to trace, there's a few other boxes which are associated with him, and we were able to look at genealogy and say fairly certainly that yes, Oshawa's John Dickey was the guy who's associated with these prisoner boxes. So he made these prisoner boxes, but isn't on any prisoner rolls. So had there not been these small artifacts made, we might not have ever known about this aspect of his history. So if you look at museums, particularly around Toronto, and there's even one in the Museum of History, they're really interesting objects. And one of the first projects I got to work on when I started at the museum was researching these objects. And I think that's also another reason why I would chalk them up as one of my favorites.
So this kind of goes along with what you were talking about then. So what's your favorite story related to your museum?
Ooh, that is another really good question. And when you sent those along, it got me thinking. Probably the stories that go with the artifacts, like that one with John Dickey, and being able to do that extra little bit of research about it. Um, I like people, and I like being able to meet and connect and hear people's stories. That's probably one of the hardest things about this pandemic is I'm not making those connections and going out into our community and talking to people and hearing from them. So those always stick out as favorite moments as well. Uh, but then again, when I saw that question, perhaps one memory which came to mind was a March break quite a few years ago. And I was taking this family on tour. And the way that tours start is the way that tours work at our site is you start at our admin building, and then we go over to the other two houses where you get to see the exhibits and you get to, see the Victorian home. And we were halfway through the tour and we were finished up in the first house and going over to the second one. And this little girl looks at me. She goes, I thought this was going to be so boring, but it's actually really interesting. And the fact that I was able to have that moment and make that connection and I was able to, impact her in that way was kind of cool. And maybe this is more of a favorite memory as opposed to a favorite story. But for me, I've grown up in the Durham region. I have family connections here for quite a number of years. And when you grow up and then get to work in a local museum, it's really quite cool because I went to the Oshawa Museum when I was in grade 4. So I did the education program back then. I think we did an activity where we churned butter. I remember there was a class exhibit, so we actually went to school at the museum. So being able, having those early childhood memories of going on the field trip and then getting to work at the museum is kind of a neat full circle moment.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way with working at the Brant Museum. I used to go there for field trips, so I get
Right?
that. Yeah. So what do you enjoy about working at your museum?
Oh, probably the people, like I said, being able to meet
Mhm.
people, make connections, maybe challenge some perspectives as well. Oshawa is long known for being a blue collar industrial town. Some of our community is changing. I think we're really wanting to make leaps and strides with our cultural communities as well. A lot of emphasis on the arts, a lot of emphasis on music, on the heritage aspects as well, and being able to share stories that aren't always as well known is always fun for me. So everybody knows General Motors. Everyone knows the story of Colonel Sam and GM and that's Oshawa. Everybody knows and is aware of General Motors, but not everybody knows that we were home to one of the largest piano companies, one of the largest piano manufacturers in the British Empire. So that's kind of interesting to share. Or we had a very large sheet metal manufacturer. So it wasn't just General Motors that we were manufacturing, but we had so many different industries in our community, and not a lot of people know that. So again, getting to challenge some of those more traditional narratives. And to that end as well, recently we've been putting an emphasis on telling underrepresented and lesser known stories. So we've been undertaking very important research on Oshawa's early Black history, Oshawa's early Asian history, and really looking at the diversity in our communities, which was far more diverse than I think a lot of people would expect it to have been, which is unfortunate. But yeah, again, it's going back to those ideas of challenging that traditional story and getting to share stories that aren't always well known.
So is there anything exciting happening at your museum this summer?
We are playing it very safe. We're very concerned about the pandemic, and I think we're a little hesitant to really make a lot of big plans, especially because we are in the GTA and things are always that little bit more dicey where we are. But we are hoping to have an exhibit open very, very soon. Our next exhibit, whenever it should open, is again going back to those underrepresented stories being told. It's called Leaving Home, Finding Home in Oshawa. And it's telling the story of the refugees, or at the time they were known the displaced persons, who arrived in our community after the Second World War. So there was a huge influx, not only in Oshawa, but I believe this was more of a Canada phenomenon, where there was a huge influx of settlers from the Eastern European regions. They were fleeing after communism was starting to expand. They were really trying to get out of those war-torn areas and come to Canada. And we had a very large population who came here, largely because there was work. There were all of these industries in town, but also there were a lot of pre-established communities as well. So there were already these support groups and these networks and people who came from the same areas that you did. And so that's an exhibit which has been probably 5 years in the making, because these are stories that 5 years ago we didn't have. So we've undertook a very big oral history project. We talked to people who came at that time as children and collected their stories and their memories of what it was like to leave home and then find home in Oshawa. So we are hoping to get that exhibit opened this summer, and it's likely going to be up for at least a year and a half so that we can get as many people in to see it.
That's really interesting. So that's it for all my questions. Thank you so much for participating in our Museum Month activities. So I think that's all for now. I'll
Perfect.
stop the recording.